Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. In today's video, I'm going to be going through my last set of positional rankings. So in the past week, I've gone through my running backs, wide receivers, and then quarterbacks. So now it's time to talk about the top 12 tight ends. And I feel like, as the years go on, the tight end position just continues to get deeper and deeper. We're no longer in those years where it's like two or three top guys and then everyone else is just garbage and you're chasing touchdowns. You still clearly have your top dogs, but there are a lot of players who can slide in as like mid to back end tight end ones. And let's just jump right into the list. Starting off here at number 1, this is where I have Travis Kelce. He has finished as a top 2 tight end in points per game from 2016 to 2021. So the man is just so incredibly consistent. He's an absolute target funnel. He's seen at least 130 targets in each of the past 4 seasons, and he could even see more this year with Tyreek Hill no longer on the team. And then he's just always on the field. You never have to worry about injuries with Travis Kelce. Since his rookie year, Kelce has only missed 3 games, so in my mind, he is the clear number 1 tight end heading into next season. Now, number 2, this is where I have Mark Andrews, and we knew he was a solid mid to high end tight end 1 heading into last year, but he really had a breakout 2021, finished as the tight end 1 in points per game, averaged 17.7 points per game. That is elite production at the tight end position. Amongst all tight ends, he was number 1 in target share, targets, receptions, receiving yards, deep targets, and red zone targets. So he's getting the volume, he's producing, and then he's also getting the important volume, down the field for big plays and in the red zone. I just don't think Mark Andrews is going to replicate that 2021 season in 2022 due to a lot of preseason injuries to the Ravens roster, most notably J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. The Ravens kind of had to shift to a much more pass-heavy attack. They went from 25.4 pass attempts per game in 2020 to 35.9, so over 10 passes per game more, in just 1 year. I expect Mark Andrews to be a really solid tight end, but I'm definitely not expecting, the 154 targets that he did see last season. Now moving on to number 3, this is where I have Kyle Pitts, and he finished as the tight end 11 in points per game last year, but it was overall an amazing season. As a rookie tight end, which is a spot where most people struggle, Kyle Pitts was number 3 in receiving yards, number 5 in targets, number 7 in receptions. What really held him back for fantasy was just his 1 touchdown. He scored 1 touchdown on 110 targets. That is absolutely unheard of. That is bound to correct at least a little bit heading into next season. And I do know this Falcons offense is likely going to be terrible. It looks like it's going to be Mariota at quarterback. Maybe they snag someone in the draft. They don't really have many weapons there, but I still think, Pitts is going to improve as a player, and I do think he's going to be a target funnel in 2022. So it's kind of a tough call to put him here at number 3 because as I'm going to get into at 4 and 5 or even 6, there are very established, top tier fantasy tight ends. So I wouldn't be mad if you had Kyle Pitts at like number 5. Just for me, he's going to slot in at number 3 because we do know he can carry that offense and, that could lead to some massive production. At number 4, I have George Kittle, and he's really been a high-end tight end 1 ever since 2018. I'm definitely expecting big things out of Kittle next season, but I do also understand that he has a lot of target competition. The tight ends ahead of him, Mark Andrews, you've got Bateman and Marquise Brown, but I think, most people would probably say he's the number 1 target there. Kelce with Hill gone, he's the clear number 1 with Kyle Pitts. We don't even know who their wide receivers are going to be, but George Kittle's competing with guys like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and there were, a decent number of games last year where Kittle was really just not a factor in the receiving department. Not necessarily his fault. Maybe they were using him as a blocker. Maybe they were just feeding guys like Deebo, but he was targeted 4 times or fewer in 5 out of 14 games. That's not really something you want to see out of a, top tier tight end. But then he was kind of able to make up for it throughout the year with some monster performances kind of sprinkled in there. But now with Trey Lance likely taking over as the QB1, I could definitely see this team's pass attempts per game decreasing, which obviously would limit the opportunities that George Kittle could potentially receive. Now at number 5, I have Darren Waller, and he definitely had a disappointing 2021 season. Finished as the tight end 6 in points per game, which doesn't sound terrible, but he was just very far away from being a high-end tight end 1, which is definitely what he was drafted to be. He was going at like late round 2, early round 3, so you were expecting kind of like upwards of 14 points per game. He definitely did not do that for you in your lineups, and he is no longer the number 1 target on his team now that Davante Adams is there. But I think, that might not be a horrible thing for him because this offense as a whole is going to be much better. You've got Derek Carr. He finally has some weapons. So you're going to have Davante Adams. You're going to have Darren Waller. Hunter Renfrow is going to be in the mix. And I think we're definitely going to see an uptick in Darren Waller's efficiency. There were games last year where he was getting a ton of targets, but they were really just not kind of producing to top production because he had so much attention on him, and there really just weren't a lot of other options on that Raiders offense. So I think he's going to be a solid option this season, but I don't know if he's going to have the ceiling he's had in years past because I don't know if he's just going to be seeing that same volume now that Davante Adams is likely going to be the guy getting, the number 1 target workload. Moving on to number 6, this is where I have Rob Gronkowski. And at this point, it seems like there's 2 options for Gronk. He's either going to return to the Bucs or retire. I really don't see him coming back to football and then just going and playing on a random team. Wouldn't make much sense, especially now that Brady's back. So in these rankings, I'm just going to assume he's back because if he retires, obviously he's just out of the rankings and then everyone else would move up. After an okay 2020 season when he returned from his first retirement, Gronk was dominant in 2021. He was actually the tight end 3 in points per game and looked pretty close to, prime Gronkowski form. For Gronk, injuries are always going to be a question just because he has so much wear and tear on his body. But I do think the Bucs have kind of shown that they're prioritizing giving him rest. They want him to be on the field a ton, and we actually saw that in his first year back. Played his first full season in a long, long time. So in those 2 years with the Bucs, he has only missed 5 games. If Gronk does actually retire, I think then we could see a big bump in Russell Gage's production because Bruce Arians typically isn't a coach that likes to use tight ends, super often. But when you have Gronk, you got to get him out there. So if Gronk does retire, I think we're going to see a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, which would obviously benefit Russell Gage, who's going to be playing behind Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. At number 7, I have TJ Hockenson, and he had a solid overall year in 2021, finished as the tight end 6 in points per game. And with Hawk here, I feel like we're just looking at a reliable mid-tier tight end 1. He had solid volume last year, averaged 6.9 targets per game. But when we were kind of looking at the upside for Hockenson, it was like, okay, this offense is not going to be good. They don't have a ton of weapons. Maybe Hockenson is just a target funnel, and that's kind of his pathway to high-end tight end 1 status. It didn't really help him. He wasn't elevated into that high-end tight end 1 territory. And heading into next season, I do think this offense may be slightly better, but there are also going to be some more weapons in the mix. Guys like Amon-Ra, who broke out, after TJ Hockenson was out for the season. And then they also signed a guy like DJ Chark. So maybe the offense is slightly better, but there's also going to be more target competition. So I feel like number 7 here is a fair spot. At number 8, I have Dalton Schultz, who definitely had a breakout 2021 season. Actually finished as the tight end 5 in points per game. Basically was not drafted in any normal size leagues, finishing as like a mid to almost high-end tight end 1. And he was just an all-around really solid weapon at the tight end position. He was targeted 104 times. That's really nice volume. 78 receptions, 808 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. So just a very well-rounded stat line there. And then entering 2022, he's going to be the clear-cut tight end 1 on the Cowboys. Heading into last season, he was splitting reps and snaps with Blake Jarwin early in the season. That is not the case. They know Dalton Schultz is going to be the guy. Amari Cooper is gone, and Schultz is once again going to be a top target on this team. So maybe you don't want to spend the high price tag, on some of these high-end tight end 1s, the Kelces, the Mark Andrews. You can wait and get a guy, probably not going to fall to double-digit rounds, but maybe round 7, 8, 9. You can go out and get yourself a guy like Dalton Schultz. At number 9, I have Dallas Goedert. And I thought this was kind of a tough call between Goedert and Schultz. I did end up putting Schultz ahead of Goedert. He had a solid 2021, finished the season with some monster games down the stretch. I feel like in 2022, he's just going to slot in as like a mid-tier tight end one. I'm not really seeing a ton of ceiling there, but I would also be surprised if he like falls out of the top 12 tight ends in terms of points per game. And right now, he is still lined up to be one of Jalen Hurts' top targets in the 2022 season. At number 10, this is where I have Pat Freiermuth, coming off of a fairly impressive rookie season, caught 60 passes for 497 yards and 7 touchdowns. I'm not really sure if Freiermuth is going to take a massive leap in 2022. I definitely think he's a really solid red zone threat, but I do think he was aided, in the target department, the target share area, by Big Ben's just lack of deep passing. Freiermuth was kind of one of his check down options, similar to a guy like Najee Harris, who just racked up a lot of points in like PPR formats because they were getting targeted so much. But in terms of like real life efficiency, he was pretty inefficient. So I do like the player, but right now I'm just not willing to rank him over guys that we've seen in the past produce, as top 12 tight ends. At number 11, I have Zach Ertz, and he is back with the Cardinals. I thought that was the best landing spot for him, going back to Arizona. He was the tight end 10 in points per game when you're looking at the entire season. But if you're only counting his games with the Cardinals, he was traded, close to midseason from the Eagles to the Cardinals. He actually would have been the tight end 8 and averaged 11.9 points per game as a member of the Cardinals. It's clear that Ertz is on the down end of his career. He is no longer in his prime, but he also showed that he can still produce at a fairly high level for fantasy football. And the Cardinals have shown, that they want and know how to get him involved in their offense. So a really solid back-end tight end one option if you want to wait, later in drafts for that position. And then to wrap up the top 12, this is where I have Dawson Knox. After a nice 2021 season, I kind of feel like Knox is going to be overvalued heading into 2022. He was the tight end 9 in points per game, which is solid, but a major part of that tight end 9 finish was his 9 touchdowns in 15 games. And I just don't know if the volume is going to be there consistently for Dawson Knox. He only averaged 4.7 targets and 39 receiving yards per game. And if those touchdowns come back to earth next year, I can see a lot of people being disappointed, in drafting Dawson Knox. So here as like a fringe tight end 1, I think it's a fair ranking. But if we're picking him like tight end 8, tight end 9, I would be a little concerned there. I think, probably to a lesser extent, but it kind of reminds me of the Robert Tonyan situation last year, a guy who doesn't have a ton of volume, but scored a ton of touchdowns. When those touchdowns are gone, the production is just totally gone. So we're not drafting a guy like Hunter Henry way up here. Obviously, as a whole, he wasn't as good, but I feel like it's a similar situation. These guys who got into the end zone a ton, it may not replicate the next season, and then you're just left with not a ton of volume and not a lot of production. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 12 tight ends. Let me know what you guys think about these rankings down below in the comment section. As always, thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you guys in the next one.